Welcome back to the channel. What is happening right now at Roland Garros feels far bigger than a breakout tournament run. Bigger than rankings. Bigger than one athlete suddenly becoming popular. Something unusual is unfolding in Paris, and even people who have spent their entire lives around tennis are struggling to fully explain it. Because this is not how tennis crowds are supposed to behave. For decades, the sport has existed within a familiar rhythm. The loudest ovations belong to champions carrying shelves full of Grand Slam trophies. The largest crowds gather around icons whose greatness has already been cemented across generations. The emotional heartbeat of the French Open traditionally belongs to French stars, European legends, or global superstars like Novak Djokovic, Rafael Nadal, or Carlos Alcaraz. That has always been the natural order of Roland Garros. But in 2026, something shifted. Now, every morning in Paris, crowds begin gathering hours before matches even start. Walkways surrounding the practice courts fill shoulder to shoulder. Security personnel redirect foot traffic. Fans stand on benches holding phones high above their heads, hoping to capture even a few seconds of warm-ups. Entire groups wait in line just to glimpse one specific player stepping onto clay. And that player is not yet a Grand Slam champion. She is not world number one. She is not the centerpiece of traditional tennis marketing. She is a 20-year-old Filipina named Alexandra Eala. And Paris is beginning to realize that what follows her from tournament to tournament is not ordinary fandom. It is something much deeper. At first, tournament officials assumed it was temporary excitement. Tennis sees hype cycles all the time. A promising teenager breaks through, attracts attention for a few months. Then the spotlight drifts elsewhere. But the atmosphere surrounding Eala immediately felt different. The first signs appeared outside Court 4 during routine practice sessions. Normally, practice courts at Grand Slams attract dedicated tennis fans, coaches, and maybe a few dozen spectators hoping to watch elite athletes up close. Even top-ranked players rarely generate overwhelming crowds during ordinary training sessions. But when Alexandra Eala stepped onto the practice court at Roland Garros, the atmosphere transformed completely. Fans started arriving nearly 2 hours early just to secure standing room. Philippine flags appeared everywhere. Children climbed onto barriers. Adults stretched over railings hoping for autographs. Every clean forehand winner during practice drew cheers loud enough to echo across neighboring courts. The noise shocked longtime observers because tennis practice sessions are usually quiet, respectful, almost subdued. This was not subdued. Chants of Laban Alex rolled through walkways normally filled only with soft conversation and camera clicks. French spectators stopped to ask who she was. Journalists abandoned practice schedules and started following the crowds instead. Security guards reportedly compared the energy to football fandom rather than traditional tennis culture. And perhaps the most remarkable detail was this. Most of these fans were not casual tourists attending Roland Garros for the experience. They came specifically for her. Across Paris, stories emerged of Filipino families traveling from London, Berlin, Amsterdam, Madrid, Rome, and smaller European cities just to watch Eala compete. Some admitted they had never attended a professional tennis tournament before. Others said they barely followed tennis until Eala's rise began dominating headlines back home in the Philippines. Yet now they were standing outside Roland Garros wrapped in flags, chanting as though they were attending a World Cup final. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what representation means in a global sport historically dominated by a small cluster of nations. Tennis has long presented itself as international, but the highest levels of the sport have still revolved around familiar power centers. United States, Spain, France, Serbia, Switzerland, Russia, Australia. Those countries shaped the sport's mythology for decades. Southeast Asia rarely occupied the center of the conversation. For years, aspiring tennis players from the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, or Vietnam grew up watching elite champions while quietly understanding that athletes who looked like them almost never reached the very top of the sport. Grand Slam trophies, major sponsorship campaigns, center court attention. Those things felt geographically distant. Then Alexandra Eala arrived. not just as a participant, as a contender, as someone capable of defeating elite players on major stages. And suddenly millions of people across Southeast Asia saw a door opening that previously felt locked shut. That emotional connection cannot be measured purely through rankings or statistics. It explains why fans travel internationally simply to watch her practice. It explains why crowds become emotional during warm-ups. And it explains why the atmosphere around her matches feels fundamentally different from standard tennis support. Because for many supporters, watching Alexandra Eala does not feel like ordinary entertainment. Feels personal. The scale of that connection became impossible to ignore after her breakthrough performances over the past 14 months. Inside tennis circles, there had always been belief surrounding her talent. Her junior success announced her as one of the most promising young players in the world. Winning the Junior US Open singles title placed her firmly on the radar of coaches, analysts, and scouts who understood how difficult that achievement truly was. But junior success guarantees nothing professionally. The transition from junior tennis to the WTA Tour is one of the most brutal jumps in sports. Young players suddenly face relentless travel schedules, physically mature opponents, media scrutiny, and the psychological exhaustion of competing nearly every week in different countries across multiple continents. Many gifted juniors disappear during that transition. Eala did not disappear. She evolved. And the turning point came in Miami. Entering the tournament as an underdog, she produced the type of run that forces the entire sport to pay attention. Match after match, she played fearless tennis against established names. Her movement looked sharper. Her confidence visibly strengthened. The composure that once appeared only in flashes suddenly became consistent. Then came the victory over Iga Swiatek. That was the moment everything changed. Because defeating an elite champion on one of the biggest stages in tennis instantly alters perception. Before Miami, Alexandra Eala was viewed as a promising prospect. After Miami, she became a legitimate threat. The crowds began growing immediately afterward. First, the change happened gradually. Larger groups waiting outside practice courts. More cameras during warm-ups. Increased media attention. More interview requests. Then the momentum accelerated rapidly. Her run to the final in Eastbourne proved her game could translate onto grass. Her WTA 125 title in Guadalajara reinforced the idea that Miami was not a lucky streak. Her deep run in Auckland pushed her into the WTA top 50, making her the first Filipina player in history to reach that milestone. Every achievement added fuel to the movement building around her. And movement is truly the correct word. Because what follows Alexandra Eala no longer resembles ordinary sports fandom. It resembles collective ownership. Fans speak about her success using language like "our moment" and "our journey." That emotional vocabulary matters because it transforms athletic success into shared identity. In interviews, Eala herself has admitted that adjusting to the scale of attention has sometimes felt psychologically overwhelming. Not long ago, she was simply another young player grinding through the lower levels of professional tennis. Now thousands of people organize travel schedules around her matches. That creates enormous emotional pressure. How do you process entire communities investing emotionally in your victories and losses? How do you stay mentally balanced when every result suddenly carries symbolic meaning far beyond the scoreboard? How do you protect your focus while understanding that millions of people now see themselves reflected in your success? Those questions have become central to her rise. And perhaps the most impressive aspect of Alexandra Eala's journey has been her honesty about those challenges. Rather than pretending the pressure does not exist, she has openly acknowledged the difficulty of processing fame so quickly. That vulnerability has only strengthened fans' emotional connection to her. Because vulnerability makes athletes human. And humanity is what transforms admiration into loyalty. Even fellow players have started reacting to the scale of her support. Amanda Anisimova publicly commented on the atmosphere surrounding Eala during tournaments, expressing amazement at how energized crowds become whenever the Filipina steps onto the court. Players notice these things immediately. Professional tennis operates inside carefully controlled environments. Athletes instantly recognize when the emotional energy surrounding one player feels unusually intense. And right now, Eala's matches feel different. Not because she is always the highest-ranked player in the draw, but because emotionally, she often feels like the center of the tournament. That distinction matters enormously. The French Open crowd traditionally rewards artistry, resilience, and visible struggle. Paris can be unforgiving toward athletes who appear emotionally detached or passive. Roland Garros spectators appreciate players willing to suffer publicly for every point. That cultural dynamic has aligned perfectly with Alexandra Eala's personality and playing style. Her matches are emotional, physical, combative. You can see frustration, determination, exhaustion, belief, and resilience unfolding point by point. Crowds respond to authenticity, and Paris has clearly responded to hers. To understand the deeper roots of her mentality, however, you have to travel years backward. Back to Mallorca, back to the Rafa Nadal Academy. At just 12 years old, Alexandra Eala made a decision that fundamentally changed her life. She left the Philippines and moved to Spain. Think about that for a moment. At an age when most children are still dependent on family routines and familiar surroundings, she entered one of the most demanding tennis environments in the world. The transition was not merely athletic. It was emotional, cultural, and psychological. Leaving home at such a young age requires enormous sacrifice. The loneliness alone can become overwhelming. New language, new routines, new expectations, constant competition against elite young players chasing the exact same dream. The Nadal Academy became famous not only for technical development, but for cultivating a very specific mentality. Discipline over comfort, effort over excuses, resilience over emotion. Players are trained to embrace suffering as part of growth rather than something to avoid. That philosophy mirrors the identity of Rafael Nadal himself. Across 2 decades, Nadal built one of the greatest careers in sports history through relentless physical intensity and mental endurance. His matches often looked less like ordinary tennis contests and more like endurance battles. Inside the academy, young players absorbed those standards daily. Eala absorbed them too. And you can see traces of that mentality in the way she competes. She embraces long rallies. She fights through physical exchanges. She rarely stops believing during difficult moments. Even after painful losses, she usually speaks about improvement rather than collapse. That mindset has become one of the defining features of her rise. It also explains why clay court tennis represents such an important chapter in her development. Clay is widely considered the most demanding surface in tennis. Hard courts reward explosive first.